Picture a chess grandmaster staring at a board. Every piece is in his favor. He has more queens, more rooks, more bishops. His opponent is down to pawns and a battered king. Everyone watching can see it. The grandmaster can see it. The math is obvious. And yet, he doesn't move. Because he knows something the audience doesn't. The second he reaches across that board, a bomb goes off underneath it. The ceiling collapses. His neighbor pulls a knife. The building fills with water, and every single person in the room, including him, dies. That grandmaster is India. That battered opponent is Pakistan. And the bomb, the ceiling, the knife, and the water are not metaphors. They are nuclear warheads, the Himalayas, China, and the Indus River. And we are going to walk through every single one of them today. India has more of everything. A military 5 times larger, an economy 10 times bigger, the 4th most powerful armed forces on Earth, and it will never invade Pakistan. Not because it doesn't want to, because it literally cannot. Here is the answer up front before we even get into the details. India will never invade Pakistan because the cost of winning is worse than the cost of losing. Not slightly worse, not marginally worse. Existentially, catastrophically, civilization-endingly worse. The only way India wins a full-scale invasion of Pakistan is if India is also willing to cease to exist as a functioning nation. That's the crux. That's the whole story. Everything that follows is just the explanation of why. India and Pakistan have been locked in one of the most intense, bitter, and genuinely dangerous rivalries in modern history. 4 wars, hundreds of border skirmishes, a territorial dispute over Kashmir that has been frozen since 1947 like a fly trapped in amber, unresolved and festering. That border between them was drawn in 6 weeks in 1947 by a British lawyer named Cyril Radcliffe, who had never visited South Asia, spoke no Urdu or Hindi, and by his own admission, did not fully understand what he was being asked to do. He completed the task, accepted his pay, and left the country before the lines he drew triggered one of the largest mass migrations in human history. 15 million people displaced, up to 2 million dead. That wound has never fully healed. The hatred is genuine, structural, and has been reinforced by decades of state-sponsored nationalism on both sides. So on paper, purely on raw military math, why doesn't India just end it? India's military has 1.4 million active troops. Pakistan has 654,000. India's defense budget is around $72 billion. Pakistan's is around $10 billion. India's economy is $3.7 trillion. Pakistan's is $340 billion. On paper, it looks like a schoolyard fight between a heavyweight champion and a middleweight. The paper is wrong. Here's why. Reason 1. The bomb in the basement. Imagine you're playing a game of chicken. You're in a car, your opponent is in a car, and you're both speeding toward each other at 100 miles an hour. You're bigger. You have a better car. You are almost certainly going to win this collision. Except your opponent has welded himself to the steering wheel. He cannot swerve. He is physically incapable of swerving. And you know this. That is Pakistan's nuclear doctrine, and it is the single most important reason why India cannot invade. Pakistan possesses approximately 170 nuclear warheads. India has roughly the same number. That alone would give any war planner pause. But what makes Pakistan's arsenal uniquely terrifying in this specific scenario is not the size of it. It's the strategy behind it. Pakistan's military is not delusional. They know they cannot beat India in a conventional ground war. India has too many soldiers, too many tanks, too much air power. So Pakistan built its nuclear strategy specifically around the moment when that conventional defeat becomes inevitable, when Indian forces are pushing deep into Pakistani territory and the state itself is under existential threat. At that moment, Pakistani doctrine authorizes the use of tactical nuclear weapons, not against Indian cities, at least not initially, against Indian military formations on Pakistani soil, against staging areas just across the border, against the columns of tanks and infantry pressing the advance. Pakistan's nuclear weapons are not a last resort in the traditional sense. They are a tripwire, placed deliberately at the point where India starts winning too decisively. Cross that line, and the board explodes. Think about what that means for an invasion plan. India's generals draw up the operation. They identify the advance routes, the objectives, the timeline. And at some point in that plan, somewhere between crossing the border and reaching Lahore, they have to write, "At this stage, Pakistan may detonate a nuclear device on its own soil to stop our advance." And then they have to answer the next question. What do we do then? The answer is, there is no good answer. If India absorbs the strike and keeps advancing, Pakistan escalates to larger weapons. If India retaliates with its own nuclear weapons, you have an exchange between two countries with enough warheads to kill 100 million people. If India stops the advance, the invasion has failed, and Pakistan has proven that nuclear weapons deter Indian aggression forever. There is no branch of the decision tree that ends well for India. Nuclear deterrence doesn't just make the invasion costly, it makes the invasion irrational. Pakistan can't beat India in a war, but it can guarantee that India can't survive winning one. Reason 2. The geography of hell. Let's perform a thought experiment. Let's erase the nuclear weapons from this equation, which is a completely absurd hypothetical, but let's do it anyway. Because even in a world where nukes don't exist, invading Pakistan is still an act of military insanity. The India-Pakistan border stretches roughly 3,000 kilometers. Take a satellite image of that border and look at it carefully. There is no good road in. The northern section runs through Kashmir, the western Himalayas, and the Karakoram Range. These are not picturesque mountains. These are the second highest mountain range on Earth, containing peaks above 7,000 meters, passes that remain buried under snow for 6 months of the year, and terrain so vertical and brutal that standard military logistics, the trucks, the fuel lines, the artillery movements, become physically impossible. To illustrate exactly how unhinged warfare in this region actually is, consider the Siachen Glacier. Sitting at over 6,000 meters above sea level, it is the highest battlefield in documented military history. India and Pakistan have both maintained armed positions there continuously since 1984. 4 decades of soldiers stationed above 20,000 feet in temperatures that plunge to minus 60 degrees Celsius. At the Siachen Glacier, more soldiers have been killed by the weather than by enemy fire. Altitude sickness, frostbite, and avalanches are more dangerous than bullets. And both countries have kept troops there for 40 years, not because it makes strategic sense, but because neither will be the first to leave. The southern section of the border runs through the Thar Desert, one of the most arid and punishing environments in Asia. Flat enough for armored columns to move quickly, yes, but flat also means exposed, and supply lines across hundreds of kilometers of desert without reliable water infrastructure are a logistician's nightmare. India's military superiority in numbers matters significantly less when the geography neutralizes that advantage. Every viable advance route either climbs into a mountain range that kills soldiers with altitude or crawls across a desert that kills supply lines with distance. There is no easy road in. There never has been. If you're finding this useful, subscribe to Grainy Footage. We break down the geopolitical stories that don't fit in a headline. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. Reason 3. 230 million reasons it doesn't work. Let's perform another thought experiment. Nuclear weapons removed. Terrain somehow navigated. India defeats Pakistan's military in the field. Islamabad falls. The Pakistani army surrenders. Congratulations. India has now conquered Pakistan. What happens on day 2? Pakistan has a population of approximately 230 million people. That is not an abstraction. That is 230 million individual human beings, the vast majority of whom were raised in a culture where anti-Indian sentiment isn't a political opinion. It's an identity. It's in the school textbooks. It's in the national mythology. It's in the songs. The founding of Pakistan was explicitly an act of separation from India, and that separation has been defended, reinforced, and celebrated in Pakistani culture for nearly 80 years. These 230 million people will not accept Indian occupation. Not 10% of them. Not 5%. Not the fraction that would be needed to make an insurgency viable. Let's look at the historical reference points, because history is generous with examples here. The United States invaded Iraq in 2003. Iraq at the time had a population of 25 million. The U.S. military is the most powerful military force in the history of human civilization. The occupation of Iraq took 20 years, cost over $2 trillion, and the insurgency was never fully defeated. American forces withdrew, having not achieved the stated political objectives. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Afghanistan had a population of roughly 15 million at the time. The Soviet military occupied the country for 10 years. They left defeated, humiliated, and the strain of that war contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. India has fought an insurgency in Kashmir, a single disputed territory with a population of 12 million, for over 3 decades. The insurgency has not ended. Now multiply that problem by 20. Pakistan is 6 times the size of Iraq, with a population 15 times larger than Afghanistan, armed with one of the highest rates of civilian gun ownership in Asia, and backed by a military intelligence apparatus that would go underground rather than surrender. The occupation math is not close. India would need to deploy millions of soldiers indefinitely across a country the geographic size of France and Spain combined, against a population with every incentive to resist and no incentive to collaborate. The cost in lives, money, and years would be so staggering that it would eventually destroy India's own economy and political cohesion. You don't have to beat India's army, you just have to outlast India's will to stay. It always does. Reason 4. The neighbor who's been waiting for this. Here is a piece of geography that is easy to overlook when you're focused on the India-Pakistan border. India has another border, a very long one, running along the Himalayas to the north. And on the other side of that border is China. China and Pakistan have one of the most durable strategic alliances in Asia. It is not a friendship built on shared culture or values. It is a partnership built entirely on shared interests. Both countries benefit from limiting Indian power in South Asia. China has invested over $60 billion in Pakistan through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a massive infrastructure project that builds roads, ports, pipelines, and power plants across Pakistan, terminating at the deep-water port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea. That port gives China something it has been strategically desperate for: direct access to the Indian Ocean without having to sail around the entire Indian subcontinent. If India invaded Pakistan and actually threatened to succeed, China would not sit quietly and watch its $60 billion investment, its Arabian Sea access point, and its most reliable regional counterbalance get absorbed into India. China doesn't need to send 1 million soldiers into Pakistan to destroy an Indian invasion. It just needs to start moving armored divisions toward the line of actual control in the Himalayas. India then has to decide, do we split our forces? Because the two-front problem has destroyed armies since the beginning of warfare. India and China already have unresolved territorial disputes along their shared border. The line of actual control runs over 3,400 kilometers and has been the site of military standoffs and a deadly clash in the Galwan Valley as recently as 2020. An invasion of Pakistan that triggers Chinese pressure on India's northern border is not India fighting Pakistan. It's India fighting Pakistan and China simultaneously. No military strategist on earth recommends fighting a two-front war against opponents of that size. Napoleon tried it, Hitler tried it. Neither outcome was positive. Reason 5. The weapon India can't use. This is the one that almost nobody talks about, and in some ways, it's the most quietly devastating constraint of all. Picture Pakistan as a country shaped, literally, by one river system. The Indus, along with its 5 major tributaries, flows from the mountains of Kashmir and Tibet through Pakistan and out into the Arabian Sea. It is not an exaggeration to say that Pakistan would not exist without the Indus Basin. It provides drinking water for over 100 million people. It irrigates the agricultural land that feeds the country. It is the circulatory system of the Pakistani state. And it originates, almost entirely, in territory controlled by India. India sits upstream of Pakistan on the most important river system in South Asia. Theoretically, India holds a hydrological gun to Pakistan's head at all times. But it cannot pull the trigger, because pulling it would be a crime against humanity with the full weight of the international community landing on India overnight. The Indus Waters Treaty, signed in 1960, brokered by the World Bank, divides the river system between the two countries. This treaty has survived all 4 wars. It survived the Kargil conflict in 1999. It survived the 2019 Pulwama crisis. The treaty held every time, because both sides understand that violating it triggers a catastrophe that neither can survive. If India dammed or diverted the western rivers during an invasion, over 100 million Pakistanis would face a water and food crisis within months. That is not a bargaining chip. That is a war crime of historic proportions. and the international response would be instant. Every country that trades with India, invests in India, buys Indian tech services, or imports Indian pharmaceuticals would be forced to respond. Sanctions, trade embargoes, diplomatic isolation. India's economy would collapse faster than any military campaign could succeed. Water weaponization isn't just immoral, it's strategically self-defeating. This is what grainy footage does, the stories underneath the stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you get every video the moment it drops. Reason 6. The city that eats armies. We've removed the nukes, navigated the terrain, solved the occupation, neutralized China somehow, avoided the water catastrophe. India is marching into Pakistani territory. And then it reaches Karachi. Karachi is home to roughly 16 million people. It is one of the largest cities on Earth, a dense, chaotic, labyrinthine megacity built over a century with no central planning. A tangle of residential blocks, industrial zones, port facilities, and informal settlements covering hundreds of square kilometers. To take Karachi by force, India would have to fight through every inch of it. Urban warfare is the great equalizer in military history, and it is the most terrifying environment any armed force can enter. Every advantage a numerically superior force holds in open terrain disappears the moment you enter a city. Air superiority is degraded. Tanks become vulnerable to fighters with rocket-propelled grenades firing from upper floors. Artillery kills indiscriminately. Soldiers have to clear every building, room by room, floor by floor, stairwell by stairwell. The Battle of Mosul in 2016 and 2017, coalition forces retaking a single city from approximately 6,000 ISIS fighters, took 9 months and left much of the city in ruins. Mosul's population was 1.5 million. Karachi's is 16 million, more than 10 times larger. Now consider that Pakistan has multiple cities in this population range. Lahore, 13 million. Faisalabad, 3.6 million. Rawalpindi, Islamabad, Multan, Peshawar. Each one would require a separate urban campaign. Karachi alone would take longer to pacify than the entire Iraq War took to start and initially conclude. And while India's forces were grinding through it street by street, their casualties would mount to levels that no democratic government could survive politically. Indian voters watching their sons come home in boxes from an endless urban war in Pakistan would not tolerate it for 5 years. They would barely tolerate it for 5 months. The insurgents inside those cities don't need to win. They just need to survive long enough for India's political will to collapse. It always does. So what actually keeps the peace? Let's bring it back to that chess grandmaster. He's staring at the board. His opponent is battered, outgunned, outmatched in every measurable category. The audience can't understand why he won't move, and he sits there because he knows that the board is rigged. That beneath the pieces, beneath the elegant logic of the game, is a structure of consequences so severe that winning is indistinguishable from losing. India doesn't invade Pakistan because of 6 overlapping, mutually reinforcing layers of impossibility. Nuclear weapons make the invasion suicidal. The moment India starts winning, Pakistan has the option to make everyone lose. The terrain makes the initial advance catastrophically difficult before a single bomb is dropped. The occupation math makes any victory Pyrrhic. 230 million armed, nationalistic people cannot be held by military force for any sustained period. China makes it a two-front war, the oldest and most reliable way to destroy an army. The Indus River makes water weaponization a diplomatic and economic suicide pact. And urban warfare in Pakistan's cities makes the endgame a generational military graveyard. No single one of these factors prevents India from invading Pakistan. All 6 of them together, stacked on top of each other, create a deterrent structure so total that invasion isn't just unlikely, it's functionally inconceivable. The cost exceeds any possible benefit by a margin so enormous that the calculation isn't even close. What's left is a tension that has persisted for nearly 80 years and shows no sign of resolving. 2 nuclear-armed countries, separated by a badly drawn colonial border, glaring at each other across a line that has cost millions of lives and will cost more. Held in a hostile, brittle, furious peace by the shared understanding that the alternative is worse for both of them. Not a good system, not a stable system, not a just system, but it is the system. And so far, through 4 wars, through terrorist attacks, through nuclear tests, through crises that brought both countries to the brink, it is held. India won't invade Pakistan because it can't. Not can't in the sense of lacking the desire, can't in the sense that the laws of strategic mathematics will not permit it. The equation never balances. The outcome is always worse than the status quo, no matter how intolerable the status quo becomes. That's the answer. It was always math. Cold, brutal, consequence-laden math. If this video made you think differently about something you thought you already understood, that's what grainy footage is for. Subscribe, leave a comment, and tell us which conflict you want us to break down next. See you in the next one.